Welcome back to Black News Tonight. When it comes to experiencing racism at the workplace, most of us either look the other way, feel helpless, implode, or sometimes even explode. But now there is a brand new book that has the potential to change all of that. Diversity consultant Y-Vonne Hutchinson's How to Talk to Your Boss About Race, Speaking Up Without Getting Shut Down. It starts with the premise that we all have power regardless of our positions. And it provides hands-on, practical advice on how to start much needed, even though they're hard, conversations about race and come closer to achieving equity and dismantling racism in the workplace. Joining me now is the author of the book, Y-Vonne Hutchinson, and she is the CEO and founder of ReadySet. That's a diversity consulting and strategy firm as well. Y-Vonne, thank you so much for joining me on the show. What are some signs of a racist workplace?
Thank you so much for having me. And you know, it's actually a pretty easy answer to your question. I tell readers in my book, most workplaces are racist, right? Let's just cut to the chase. Most workplaces are racist. You know, that's the way it's always been in the U.S. It's still that way now. However, if you want concrete signs, there are a few you can look for. Look for who has power, right? Like who is sitting in the C-suite? Where are the white people in your organization, and where are the rest of the people of color? Where are the black and brown folks? Also, who does well? Who tends to stay longer? Who's getting promoted? Who gets paid more? All of these are signs of if a workplace is racist. And quite often a workplace won't come out and say we're racist, so it's important to look for those signs.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that the way that you're telling us to look for racism in the workplace is important, right? Because for some people, unless the N-word is written on the wall and there's nooses hanging, they're going to say, well, it's just a workplace. But your point is, an ordinary everyday workplace is in many ways oftentimes racist because of all of these things you point out systemically, relations of power, etc. In that space, though, we still have to have the conversation about race and about racism. What are some tips that you could share with people who are interested in having a conversation, not just with their coworkers, but with their boss about racism in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I start with first advising people to know themselves, understand what identity you bring to the conversation, how that affects what you see, what you don't see, and how you're heard. You know, I'm a black woman, and sometimes people don't want to talk to me about racism, you know, even though they hired me to do just that. So understand how your identity affects the conversation. I also advise people don't go at this alone. I think it's tempting to think of change as being driven by just one person. That's how we're taught to view social movements and social change. When in reality, these movements, the civil rights movement, labor rights movement, they happen as a result of collective action. So really think about the community of people within your workplace who are concerned with the same things that you are. And then practice your arguments, be realistic about what your boss can do, be firm on the kind of objective you have, what you want to see coming out of this conversation. And when you're in it, and I think this is really hard for those of us who suffer as a result of racism at work, who are traumatized, but be mindful about your approach. If you go straight to shame, go straight to calling out, you're less likely to get an ally in the long run. And maybe that's what you want, but you need to be real with yourself about that. So really think about when you model growth, when you model your own personal struggle, when you call people in versus calling people out, and the standards that you set to make sure that the person you're talking to is showing progress, right? Because if they're not, maybe you want to do something else. You know, maybe you want to talk to someone else. Maybe you want to walk away altogether.
When you give the kind of feedback or engage in the kind of dialogue that you're talking about, especially with a boss, I would imagine, I'm basing this on my own experiences, not just in the workplace, but with white people in general. What kind of defense mechanisms can I expect people to use? What kind of pushback should I expect to get? Because it's not like people are just going to naturally say, oh, I hadn't thought about that before. Thank you so much. Let me go change my life. So what should we expect instead?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about this in the book that we have to expect some kind of pushback. And I've gotten it too. You know, in the book, I tell a story of one of my bosses told me that, you know, in France, they throw bananas at soccer players, but that's not racist, right? And that's a form of pushback. You know, it's called denialism. And I saw that quite a bit in my experience. I advise people to prepare for that, prepare for fragility, tears, right? White tears are real. Sometimes they come up in conversations like this, or anger, the fact that someone might take it personally. I always advise people to focus on the actions and the impact those actions have. But even if you do that perfectly, you can still have someone who's personally offended. So, I always say there's some rebuttals that I talk about that in the book. But also, I think we have to be prepared for when the fragility gets to be too much and when there might be backlash. Um, Optimistically, I like to say this is a process. So even if you encounter some fragility at the beginning, create space, walk away, give that person time to process, and then come back, right? Because this doesn't all happen in one conversation.
So let's say there are major signs of racism in a workplace. Let's say there's a clear lack of equity in the workplace as well. And let's say the CEO or the manager or the director, whatever, the boss is black. What do you do then?
I think it's hard, right? It depends on what kind of leader you're talking about. In corporate organizations, there are Black figureheads, and then there are Black people with real institutional power, right? There are also Black people who are invested in white supremacy. And you kind of have to know what you're dealing with. My mom used to tell me all skin folk ain't kinfolk. And I think that's true, especially in the corporate world. And, in some ways, I think for those people who that you can't bring in, who are not invested in you or your success, who are coming at this from an oppositional place, I advise you to treat them the same way that you would a white person coming from that place, because they have the potential to enact the same level of harm, right? And I think, no matter what, you should try to be compassionate, have a growth mindset, but at the end of the day, harm is harm, right? And if a person is harming you and makes no sort of attempt to change, then you have to adjust your behavior.
In the book, you say you didn't get your real wake-up call until you entered the professional workforce. You said, I saw my career as the culmination of all my hard work, the manifestation of my Black excellence. It was, in truth, the beginning of my failure. Before we go, tell me about that. What does that mean?
That means that regardless of what my mama told me, because she told me different and I didn't listen, I thought that I could achieve my way out of Blackness. I thought if I went to the right schools, if I worked hard enough, if I got the right job, that racism was just not going to affect me like it affected other people. And I thought that because that's what I was told by white people, right? So there was a basis for that reasoning, and what I found is when I went into the workplace, I started experiencing these patterns of behavior. I didn't get feedback. People didn't think that I could do the work. I experienced microaggressions, although I didn't know that's what they were at the time. And I had to come to terms with the fact that no matter what I did, I was still going to be negatively impacted by racism, right? Because I'm not the one responsible for the racism, it's the person on the other side. And that was always going to be there. I had to come to terms with my Blackness and what that meant.
Wow. She graduates from Harvard Law School. She's got a successful career. And she said, I found out I couldn't perform my way, achieve my way, succeed my way out of Blackness. That's a powerful point. That's a powerful observation, everybody. Make sure you understand what the sister is saying. Y-Vonne is saying that your Blackness is not something that gets left at the door when you achieve high. Black people, as we navigate the corporate suites, as we navigate the most successful dimensions of society, we still have to deal with structural racism. We still have to deal with interpersonal racism. There's a lot of stuff we have to deal with, and we have to figure out how to have those conversations with our bosses, with our colleagues, with our peers, and that's why her book is so important. Y-Vonne, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for writing this incredibly interesting and provocative book. Again, everybody, it's called How to Talk to Your Boss About Race, Speaking Up Without Getting Shut Down. It's available wherever books are sold, but you already know I'm finna tell you, it's best to get it at an independently owned Black bookstore.